So welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out today, students especially for being here. This is the culmination of a lot of hard work. 9 months of capstone work, 12 months of academic work. We have some sponsors here. We have some sponsors for next year here. So welcome to everybody. Thank you for coming out. Hopefully, you've had a little bit of fun along the way. There's a few fun pictures on here. But there's been a lot of hard work, like I said, so it's a really good time for us to come together. Going to our next page, you can see this is our tour posters. We did go to all these locations in about 18 days, and I charted it out 3,214 miles driving. And yes, that's me driving the van there, and that was pretty much where I was for most of the time, it seems like. But for the sponsors here, thank you so much. You make a difference in the student experience, giving them so much more than just their academic coursework. And this is, really kind of a bittersweet day for all of us. We've gotten to know the students so well over the course of this time, and now you're leaving us. So, but we wish you well, and we know great things are ahead for all of you. I did want to, and I don't think she's seen this page yet, to thank Adrian. I think everybody knows Adrian. Adrian has always said it's the face of the program. She was around here at the inception of things, helped get things off the ground. So I don't want to embarrass Adrian too much here, but I will also tell you that she was also recently received the Pamplin Individual Excellence Award. So one of a handful of people for that on a job well done. So I'm not going to belabor that point, but we thank you, Adrian. And I'll give thank you to everybody else later who put this on. We'll do it at the back part of this. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Linda Christie, our director of the program, who's going to tell you about the day we have ahead for you. So thank you.
Oh, well, it's great to see you all. This is really our graduation, our chance to see you in one place. In fact, I woke up this morning thinking, I'm going to be sad that I won't see you again for quite some time. I hope you'll come back. I hope you'll stay in touch. But I want to welcome our guests. Thank you for coming to be here with us. I also want to introduce a little bit about what you're going to experience today. So we have 10 teams. They worked with 10 different companies on 10 different projects. And as Jay mentioned, we've been at all of these company sites. We're really proud of our students and the work, problems that they solved, how they learned what the problem was for the company, how they found the right data, they found the way to analyze it. They worked really cogently, they worked together as teams, and they came up with great solutions. So today what you're going to see is a little bit of a truncated version. So you're going to get the 10-minute version of what they did in 20 or 20 plus minutes with their customers. So often with their customers, they also had a demo of a product. We're not going to show those, but just a shorter version for you to get a sense of each team and what they've done. And for the students, they're all what their classmates have done. They haven't had access to all this information. So after each presentation, there'll be 5 minutes questions and answers. And we're going to let our guests ask questions first. We expect 2 to 3 questions probably from guests, and maybe we'll have time for another 1 or 2 from a student, but we'll have guests to ask first and students second. So if you have a burning question you don't get in, feel free to do that during one of our breaks or over lunch. And brings us to the schedule for today. So we're going to have 3 presentations here, and then we'll take a short break. We'll have another 4 presentations before lunch, and then we'll have 3 more presentations and a bit of a celebration at the end in terms of honoring and acknowledging each student and the work that you've done. So without further ado, I think we're ready for the Leidos Intel team. They're going to kick us off with our first presentation.
Morning, everyone. My name is Dave. With me is, and today we'll be presenting on supply chain resiliency within the semiconductor industry. So to start off, we know that the U.S. and the world is becoming more interconnected with global trade. And with that, what we've seen in the past is with the supply chain disruption, we can see that This would cause negative effects with our economy and national security. And we also know that semiconductors play a huge part of this. So the aim of this presentation is to help mitigate the risk with that. So now I'll pass it off to Lucas for the project goals.
All right, thanks, Dave. So our first project goal was to research and understand the problem space. And this was not only for us, but for Leidos internally. We wanted to create an extensive bibliography for them to research this topic further. Next, we wanted to utilize the subject matter expertise from our meetings to inform our project flow. They were integral in every part of the project, from the project or the model structure, our variable identification, and lastly, with our recommendations. And then lastly, we wanted to develop a model that quantifies strategic insecurities, because we realized that there's a trade-off between realizing these costs when they occur or making the investment to mitigate them. Next, I'm going to pass it off to Cal to talk about some of the subject matter experts that we met with.
All right, thanks. So moving on from here, first we gathered background information through 5 research sprints, as well as spoke with these subject matter experts, Intel, CISA, DHS, Melman Castagnetti, their lobbyist organization. Next, we also spoke with Dr. Byron Sang from the Department of Economics, and our faculty advisor was Dr. Matthew Hicks from the Computer Science Department. And with that, I'll pass it to James.
Thanks, Kyle. So the structure of the model was adapted from the Department of Homeland Security, called an economic value trade-off model. The structure is such that there are any number of variables, each with an associated X and K metric. The X represents the level of each variable, while the K represents the weight of each variable. And each variable's cost contribution is then calculated as the product between these two factors. The final output of this model is to sum the cost contributions to find the total strategic insecurity risk. So moving forward, our list of variables was identified primarily through Intel Corporation. We wanted to find a set of variables that were large enough to encapsulate the majority of the risk within the semiconductor supply chain, but were also independent so that their costs were not counted more than once. So after a few iterations with both Intel and Leidos themselves, we discovered these 5 variables, which were geographic concentration, criticality, replaceability, number of suppliers, and political risk. And now I'll pass it off to Dave here, who can go over this model a little bit more.
Thanks, James. So taking a quick look at the model, we'll delve into the variables later in the future. But quickly looking, we can see every variable, their level and their weights. And from there, we can see their cost contributions all the way on the right. From there, if we take that into the base import cost of 60 cents, we can then see when everything's factored, a virtual cost of $2.11. When we take the difference between these two, we actually security risk. When we take this into the whole economy for the industry, in the event of a supply chain disruption, this could cause up to damages of $150. So we'll visit this again, but starting off back with James, we'll talk about the first variable.
Thanks, Dave. So the first variable is geographic concentration and aims to capture the risk associated with a single point of failure, given the high levels of concentration within the semiconductor industry. So we know that currently there's about a 72% concentration of manufacturing in East Asia between the countries of Taiwan, South Korea, and China. And given these levels, it's estimated that a shutdown would cost $490 billion globally in electronic device manufacturing and semiconductors. So to account for the fact that these costs are global, we found the US's chip consumption share of 11.4% and used these factors to identify the per unit insecurity cost of 58 cents per chip due to geographic concentration. So with that, I'll pass it off to Luke, who can go over the next variable.
Thanks, James. So our next variable that we identified was criticality. And after numerous conversations with one of our economics professors, we kind of wanted to take his economic lens towards this variable. And that led us to 2 main assumptions. First, that these least critical chips would be the first impacted because they have the least secure supply chains. And then next, that we would associate a higher price increase as the criticality of a chip increase. So this variable uses a ifs function in Excel to take a weighted average price increase multiplied by the import costs. And we then segmented the chips into 3 categories of criticality: low, middle, and advanced grade, with the low grade being consumer goods and the automotive industry, middle being the industrial sector, and then communications, and then the advanced grade chips being government chips used by the DoD and computer chips. And what the ifs function does is essentially it'll take into account these low grade chips first, and then as the severity increases, take into account the middle grade chips, And then as the severity reaches its peak, it'll take into account these advanced grade chips. So now I'm going to pass it off to Cal to talk about the next two variables.
All right. Thanks, Lucas. Next is replaceability, and this looks at accounting for counterfeits. So in 2011, the Semiconductor Industry Association determined that 15% of the replacement chips for the Pentagon were actually counterfeit. And this equated to about $7.5 billion a year in damages to U.S. semiconductor companies. Now, we understand that this number is from 2011, but we did just want to show an extreme within the public sector and how that could affect if it was in the private sector. So for our model here, we took our X as 15% of total chips being counterfeits within the market. And what that gives us is a per unit insecurity cost of additional per unit insecurity costs of 10 cents per chip. And then moving on to the next slide. Now, we also looked at the number of suppliers. Originally, you would think as the number of suppliers increases, the number of the competition increases, that prices will drop. But what we've seen is that this market doesn't follow that economic expectation. There's actually so much demand for these semiconductors, and it's only growing. It's actually vastly outpacing what current suppliers and any sort of future supplier could create at the moment. We're seeing 52-week waits for wafers and core memory processors and different kind of semiconductors. Just within the AI market alone, between 2018 to 2025, it's predicted to grow from 43 billion to 129 billion. McKinsey also predicts that by 2030, the semiconductor industry will be $1 trillion industry. So what we've decided to do is we took the average number of publicly traded companies that go public every year within the semiconductor industry. And during a disruption year, we found that there's an average of about 5. So with 5 suppliers entering the market, we see an additional per unit insecurity cost of 7 cents. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dave.
Thanks, Cal. So the final variable is political risk. This is very similar to James's variable. Associated with this are due to turbulence or its surrounding areas, and these sectors, those being the U.S., China, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. An example of a calamity that could impact cost with this is an invasion and Taiwan being invaded by China. So with or the score would drop off. What was calculated was finding the percentage score of manufacturing score provided by the Cato Institute, and from there we found a multiple cents. Both factored together bring an additional cost of 66 cents. So with that, I'll pass it off to Lucas for the conclusions.
Thanks, Dave. So just to kind of wrap up each of these variables, in the event of a supply chain disruption, we currently see a 66-cent increase due to political risk, and this is due to most of manufacturing being in hostile or otherwise threatened countries. Next, at the current geographic concentration level of 72% in East Asia, we see a 58-cent increase, and this can be lowered, as James kind of mentioned, with, I guess, getting rid of that 1 point source of failure. Next, at the current replacement level of 15%, we see a 10-cent increase in price. And as Cal kind of mentioned, we wanted to use this as an upper bound because we are attributing this government chip level to the entire market. Next, at a current criticality of 50% disruption, we see a 10-cent increase. And then lastly, at a base level of 5 suppliers entering the market, we see a 7-cent increase. So now I'm going to pass it off to Dave again to talk about the display again, and then talk about some recommendations.
Thanks. Just the gravity of the situation. $1.51 may not seem like a lot, but when we factor it into the whole U.S. economy, this can cause damages of $50 billion. So with that said, moving on to our recommendations, we can see here that the main areas of concern are geographic concentration and political risk, and we need to mitigate those. To do that, we should be continuing implementing strategic industrial policy, such as USICA, the FABS Act, and CHIPS Act. These are subsidies and tax incentives to US-based companies that produce or supply semiconductors. And we can see this happening with Intel Corporation. They're currently making new fabs in Germany, as well as Ohio, and plans for future states such as Arizona. So with that, this concludes our presentation. Are there any quick questions?
Well, thank you very much for joining us. We're really excited to show you what we've been working on. My name is Billy Rice. Obviously, Jay and Dr. Christie helped us a ton with this project, and we wanted to shout out our faculty advisor, Dr. Ona Shreff, too, who was, again, very helpful. So without further ado, as I said, we're really excited to jump into this. And if you could, please save all questions until the end. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. So I'm going to just be talking about a little bit of why we are here today. Currently, within Aurora Flight Sciences, they're using a data manual entry approach when it comes to tracking the production process. And specifically within that, in the industry, if you can move on to the next slide, I'll be doing a little bit of a context analysis. Within the aviation industry specifically, there's been constant technology emerging. And with that, knowing that, there's been a way that companies have been trying to think and learn about data and understanding it. And as a top competitor within the industry, it's vital that they definitely grow alongside of that. And we'll move on to the next slide. With that, keeping that in mind, we came up with a proposed system for Aurora Flight Sciences to be able to better the production process by able to track, identify, and give feedback. With tracking, we want to track comparable operations. So within the industry, understanding within their current production process, what may be going right, what may be causing delays, and how can we make it better? By making it better, we want to be able to identify critical patterns and understanding basically what certain parts may be causing those delays, and to be able to give feedback and understanding those crucial parts within the production process, we'd be able to give feedback to Aurora Flight Sciences by improving production planning and giving them feedback on where things may be causing hindrances. But I will be passing off to Curtis, who will be talking a little bit more about the project scope.
Meredith. So looking at our overview, with this project, what we really wanted to do was save, build, analyze, and automate. We wanted to identify how we could cut our clients' costs by building a tool that will identify and analyze inefficiencies related to machine idle time or material waste. And then finally, is this thing working? Finally, automate that into something that our client can use at the simple click of a button. Now, moving on to our project objectives. Our first step in this project was to identify the key information that would give us the best understanding of our data. And this step was going to play a vital role in our next objective, which was linking all 5 of the data sets together. This was an extremely iterative process for us, and Billy's actually going to go more in depth as far as the steps that we took to get everything merged. But now that we do have all the data connected, it's fully prepared for an in-depth analysis to be ran and identify any trends with current inefficiencies. Now, looking at some of our project's benefits, as I mentioned, one of our main benefits is cost reduction. Now that we do have all the data connected, our client has the capability of identifying where specifically within their production process things may not be operating as efficiently as possible. Next, competitive advantage. We know that Aurora is very highly regarded when it comes to the aircraft manufacturing. We believe that their reputation with us is a way for them to not only uphold that reputation, but build upon it as well, as data becomes more prevalent within the industry. And finally, improve scheduling. Having worked with the data over the last several months, something that came to our attention was a lack of structure when it comes to how information is stored. And we believe our tool is a great first step in the right direction. I'll be passing off to Asher, who will go about understanding.
Thank you so much for this. Yes, at once we had established the context, understood the problem, set our project objectives, it was important to dive in and understand the data. In order to do this, we started with a bit of an exploratory analysis with the information that we had available. We wanted to find important distributions, identify any missing values, any gaps that needed to be filled in the information, and also analyze the different variable relationships and see if there was any particular variables that were significant. After doing this, we looked at the following machine logs in order to do the exploratory analysis. The first was the job dispatch list, which is ASAP data that they already had. And then we had freezer data, Gerber and Cutter, and Vertec outputs. Those are the machines that we had access to throughout the process. After we had understood the data, got to know it, it was important to link all 5 of the data sets, as has been mentioned previously, in order to really get an understanding of the production process from the beginning to the end. And this is where we ran into some challenges. The first challenge was that there was a lack of connecting fields at the first look. There were all of the different data sets were from different machines that have completely different purposes. And this led to inconsistent format, which made it very difficult to find a variable that they had in common, which could be used to track the production process from beginning to end. Additionally to this, there was some sensitive data in there that needed to be scrambled. So this just meant that we had to be extra meticulous in choosing the variables that were important. I won't go too much into it though. I'm going to pass it over to Billy to talk about how we got to merge the data.
Thank you very much. So step 1 with this process was parsing the data. And this was a very big step for us. We had 4 different machine logs that we had to parse data for. The first 2, JDL and freezer, were actually pretty simple. It was just a normal CSV at one point, but there was stuff at the top that we needed to extract as well. The next 2 were awful to parse. It was terrible. It was so difficult. They weren't CSVs at all. Just random text logs that didn't have any like sort of consistency. So we had to create a really dynamic parser to extract all of the data for each of these different machine logs. This is our end data structure, and it took us a really long time to get to this, mainly because, like Asher said, part was the main connecting field, but we didn't see that. Part was different across all the different machine logs, and it was stored in different ways. So we had to talk with our sponsor and eventually figure out that we had to narrow this down and shorten it, make it so it was consistent across every single machine log. But it took a really long time to figure out that this was the connecting field. With our tool, this is some of the attainable analysis that we're excited the client can now perform. First is idle time in machine. You can look at different work packages in each different machine and figure out how long is it just sitting there and not really doing anything. Next is time in machine. And this can just show them on a number basis how long each part is staying in each machine. Percent late is another one. It's just an overview of, I guess, how well their production process is running. And lastly is match rate, which is something that we perform on our own end to make sure all of the data is matching up consistently. This is an example of timeline tracking. I mentioned work packages. I'm going to kind of fly through this. I don't want to take too long, but you can see where it enters freezer, how it gets to Gerber, how long it takes to Vertec, and then you can see how much idle time is in each machine, along with a number of other factors. This is another sample output that we're excited to provide, which is production timeline. They already have a production timeline with their SAP data, but this allows you to dive in and see which jobs are taking longer in which specific machine. These were our recommendations to them. So starting off, we recommended that they tracked production ID, because if they had just done that, then we wouldn't have had the whole mess of finding the connecting fields and working through all of this other stuff that took a lot of time. So with that, we recommended that they maintain consistency, because we do have data parsers that are integral to the success of our entire, I guess, solution. So if any of those formats started shifting up completely, then I guess our solution wouldn't perform as well. So we recommended consistency. And then we recommended that they host this data on their client-side server where they could perform any analysis that they needed. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Meredith to talk about the program a little bit.
Great, thank you so much. So just to conclude the presentation, first, I'd like to give a special thank you and shout out to a lot of people that have helped us with this project. In the beginning, we kind of explained that Dr. Onar Sharaf, our faculty sponsor, was an extreme amount of help. He came with us monthly and weekly to help us try to figure out this data. Also, we would like to give a big shout out to Boeing Aurora for also helping us and giving us our time. Our sponsor, Devin, met with us weekly and worked with us to help us figure out this solution. Also, we would like to thank Dr. Linda Christie and Jay Winkler as well for helping us and trialing us and sitting with us and practicing and figuring out the hand movements that we needed to do for our presentation, all the crazy things, understanding the things. So, but overall, this program for us was honestly gave us a great impact in our lives. We were able to get diverse learning opportunities, network with a lot of different people that we've never networked with before. And we were able to learn a lot throughout this project and gain really great industry experience. And with that, we just really wanted to thank everyone also in Cohort 6 for us as well. We definitely give you guys a thanks as well. Does anyone have any questions?
Hello, we are the Leidos Health Team, and we are here to talk about opioid misuse within the United States. First, to introduce our team, hello, my name is Chan Kim. And to introduce our leadership, we had Dr. Julie Rosen, who was our liaison between Leidos Health and us at Tech. We have Jay Winkler, who is our in-program advisor. We have Dr. Ann Brown, who's our faculty advisor, and Dr. Linda Christie, who is the new director of CBA. To talk about the mission need, this is a graphic of data from the CDC from December 2020 to December 2021. 46 states have an increase in opioid overdose death rates, and Hawaii, Maryland, and New Hampshire had a decrease in overdose death rates, with Wyoming not having sufficient data. And in 2019, VA Secretary Robert Wilkie stated that veterans are twice as more likely to die from opioid misuse than the general population. To talk about a problem statement and how to address it, we came up with what evidence-based policies or methods could we utilize to combat veteran opioid misuse. And a successful policy would include opioid overdose, our central goal, homelessness, and finally suicide amongst the veterans. Now I pass it off to Moomin for the interview scope.
Thanks, Shannon. So throughout the course of our research project, we gained a vast amount of qualitative as well as quantitative data in order to help guide our research. The primary form of qualitative data that we obtained was through interviewing medical health professionals across the state of Virginia in order to gain a deeper understanding about the opioid crisis. The scope of our interviews consisted of us interviewing medical health professionals in fields such as psychiatry, neurosurgery, pharmacy, as well as anesthesiology. Question topics consisted of mental health, suicide, policies, treatments, as well as COVID-19. Questions were asked based on profession, starting off with general questions and moving on to more field-related questions. So based on our interviews, these were 4 of the main findings that we concluded. The first one was inadequate mental health resources, where based on how you were discharged, you might not be eligible for certain programs such as the VA. And even if you are eligible for these programs, you might not have access to them, especially in rural areas. The second one is the stigma surrounding opioid misuse. There is a common misconception around those who are dealing with opioid addiction, where members in the community tend to not have compassion and empathy for those suffering from this condition. So therefore, lawmakers and governments are hesitant to implement policies that could actually help out these people. The third one was prescriptions based on subjective pain. Subjective pain is not something that you can physically see or look at or identify. And also everyone has different pain thresholds. So it's not a very consistent method in order to use to prescribe prescriptions. The last one was the lack of pain management alternatives. We live in a society today where if you're feeling some type of pain or discomfort, you usually go to the doctor and you get prescribed a pill. Now, that might be an adequate short-term solution, but this is not an adequate long-term solution to problems that are not going to go away with just the use of medicine. I'll now be passing it off to Samaya to talk about our proposed policies.
Thanks, Moomin. Getting into our first proposed policy, we recommend creating holistic treatment centers for veterans. These would have harm reduction facilities such as medical professionals and clean needles on site in order to prevent overdose deaths and bloodborne illnesses. There would also be a veteran community area so veterans could speak to those going through similar issues as them, as well as mental health resources, since there is a high correlation between mental health issues and opioid misuse. There would also be alternative pain management such as yoga and acupuncture for veterans suffering with chronic pain. Now, while this would be a good solution for an urban area, a rural area would need a different solution. Veterans have treatment centers, have more difficulties reaching treatment centers in rural areas. Currently, there are Leidos vans that go to rural areas and provide medical care that veterans may not otherwise be able to access. So we would take that method and apply to naloxone vans, which would go to rural areas and do naloxone demonstrations and distribution, as well as provide education on the risks of opioid misuse. There would be a teach the teachers mentality. So we would be reaching out to community leaders in the area so that they could further distribute that information and prepare the community better for opioid misuse and possible overdose. Another issue that we found within the current system is the lack of risk assessment. The current risk assessment within the VA is not adequate,
And we recommend creating a compassionate risk assessment questionnaire so that veterans can be asked questions such as, do you have chronic pain? Do you have a job lined up after this? Things like that, so we could accurately assess whether they are at risk for opioids misuse. So with that, we would be providing that risk assessment and providing them resources. Along with that, we would be providing education on the risks of opioid misuse, as well as resources such as overdose prevention kits, which would contain CPR aids as well as naloxone, in case they or somebody they know overdoses. Now, moving on to the cost-benefit analysis, the current cost of the opioid epidemic, according to the CDC, is $1.021 trillion, and the estimate includes costs for healthcare, criminal justice, and loss of productivity. While it is important to reduce these monetary costs, it is also important to look at the loss of life. There were 100,000 overdose deaths from April 2020 to April 2021. This is a 28% increase over the previous year. And while I said before, reducing monetary costs is important, there is a moral value of reducing the loss of life as well, especially within the veteran community. They have served a country and deserve to live a long and happy life after transitioning to veteran status. It off to Brian to talk about the data visualizations and the conclusion.
Thanks, Maida. As we mentioned, our interviews with medical professionals revealed that current policies are not equally effective in urban versus rural areas. The goal of our Tableau analysis was to identify the high-risk areas across the country that would be good locations in which to implement our recommended policies as pilot studies. We use geographical maps similar to these to identify high-risk areas with large amounts of opioid overdoses, dense veteran populations, and high veteran affairs medical spending. The veteran population graphs here show that while California has a low percentage of veterans, the size and popularity of the state still lead to California having the largest total veteran population out of any state. On the other end of the spectrum, West Virginia has a low total population, but a very high concentration of both veterans and opioid overdoses. Our analysis identified California, West Virginia, Texas, Florida, and New York as high-risk states, as our top 5 high-risk states, with West Virginia and California being the 2 primary states that we recommend implementing our policies in as pilot studies. In conclusion, our team identified 3 primary things that need to be addressed in fighting the opioid epidemic in the veteran population. 1 is the reduction of stigma against those struggling with opioid misuse who are seeking safer methods. 2 is the increased distribution of naloxone, both at the time of transitioning to veteran status and via rural distribution vans. And 3 is expanded community resources via our holistic treatment centers. As a group, we really appreciated our time working with Leidos and our sponsor, Dr. Julie Rosen. She really showed us the ropes of how to do a team project in a consulting-esque situation. So we really are appreciative of that, and I'm sure we will all be using it in our future jobs. Thank you very much for your time, and if there's any questions, we will answer those now.
Hello, everybody. We are the Carter team. My name is Skander Balgith.
My name is Ashley Cruz.
And my name is Amon Ward. So we would like to give a special thanks to Dr. Joseph Simpson, who is here today, who was our faculty sponsor. Thank you so much for guiding us and helping us through this project. We would also like to give a special thanks to Jeff Bowman, Zach Brown, and Carrie French, who worked for Carter Machinery. We would like to thank them for their guidance, their expertise with helping us through this project. Now into our project introduction. So the main objective for this project was to close the gap between a do-it-yourself customer needing a part and a do-it-yourself customer receiving that part. So a Carter do-it-yourself customer is a customer who does normally at least 30% or more of their own maintenance on their Caterpillar machines. So due to the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic and the expected economic impact from the infrastructure bill, which allocates more than $500 billion in new federal spending for infrastructure over the next 5 years, The team has come up with solutions such as better prediction framework models that identify sales opportunities for Carter's do-it-yourself customers. Moving on to the next slide, we have our problem statement. So with all these things going on, the main problem is an effort to grow part sales by 5%. To what extent can Carter Machinery accurately predict when a part will deteriorate for its do-it-yourself customers? In an effort to make this happen, we had 4 main goals for this project. We had to predict, formulate the model, continuously improve, and implement and capture. First, we had to predict the deterioration rate for an important subset of parts. Now, Carter Machinery carries a plethora of parts, so for the scope of this project, we chose to narrow and we focused on air filters. Next, we formulated the model. We formulated a data-driven prediction model that predicts the deterioration rate of air filters for a sample of 20 customers, for a sample of 20 do-it-yourself customers for Carter Machinery. Then we came up with continuous improvement recommendations that helps Carter Machinery reduce the amount of erroneous data it has in its organization and helps them kind of make sure they continuously have clean data. Once they have cleaner data, they're able to extrapolate this model to include more parts and more customers in efforts to help them grow their part sales by 5%. Next, I will pass it off to Skander, who will discuss our proposed solutions.
Thank you, Aman. So as part of our proposed solutions, we had 3 main recommendations. Number 1 is continuous improvement. Throughout the project, we realized that there were many data limitations that included missing data and erroneous data that was driven by errors in human errors in data entry. And so because we believe data is at the forefront of any successful digital transformation project, that Carter Machinery should implement continuous improvement processes when it comes to the way data is collected, warehoused, organized, and analyzed. The second proposed solution is a model framework. This is a step-by-step guideline that Carter Machinery could use to develop the forecasting formula that we developed for the rate of deterioration of any given part. And then finally, our third proposed solution is a user interface that takes the model that we've developed along with all of the data that is associated with it and puts it in an easy to use user interface where Carter Machinery can query this data in an easier way. And so with that being said, I'm going to pass it on to Ashley to talk more about data limitations and the need for continuous improvement.
Thank you, Skander. So after cleaning and analyzing the data, we learned that there are many missing erroneous data points within the data set. For example, 34% of serial numbers were missing. Additionally, 54% of machine hours were potentially labeled as 0. Many organizations don't have clean data, but having data that is manually entered incorrectly poses a lot of limitations. In the next slide, we will go over our continuous improvement efforts. We'll go over how to limit those. We understand that change is difficult, especially when things are in a certain way for many years, but we believe that if there are incentives to adopt new strategies, it could truly make a difference in the organization. For example, there could be programs that train employees to understand the importance of having clean data. There could also be a raise for those employees who abide by those strategies. Additionally, we believe that there should be a system of data validation that will prevent erroneous data points from being entered. We also believe there should be APIs that are used that will update data continuously through VisionLink. VisionLink is where machine data is stored. Lastly, we believe there should be enhanced marketing strategies at Carter Machinery. And there is a marketing strategy called right time marketing strategy, and it will reach the customer at optimal time. So that is very efficient. Moving on to the next slide, Skander is going to go over our solution methods.
Thank you, Ashley. So as part of our second proposed solution, we developed a model framework. As mentioned before, this is a step-by-step guideline that Carter Machinery can use to develop the rate of deterioration formula that we've developed for air filters. This comes in 3 phases, and it's pretty extensive, but we're trying to give a surface level here view of it. So phase 1 is defining the forecasting problem. So this comes in 2 steps. Number 1 is defining the forecasting period. Do we want to look at parts that deteriorate on average in 6 months or parts that deteriorate in 10 years? Because the longer the prediction, the less accurate and the higher the margin of error tends to be. The second thing is defining which parts do we want to look at. Do we want to look at parts that are purchased frequently that have tighter profit margins, or parts that may not be purchased as frequently with higher profit margins? So once those 2 things are defined, we move to phase 2, which is developing the forecasting formula. The forecasting formula is based on 2 main predictor variables. Number 1 is the mean hours between failure, so the number of hours it takes for that part to deteriorate, and the mean days between failure, so the number of days it takes for that part to deteriorate. We know that industry standard is to only use hours. However, a logical assumption that we made was that on a day that a machine is not being used, that part still deteriorates a little bit. For instance, pollen count can affect the deterioration of air filters, which does not have to do with utilization. Temperature, pressure, and temperature fluctuations may deteriorate rubber-based parts at a faster rate, and that does not have to do with utilization. So including that variable allowed us to include that into our model and be able to move to the next step, which is basically simulating a percentage increase in the rate of deterioration using daily time series data that we later use that simulated data to create a linear relationship with our two main variables, so mean days and mean hours between failure. Once we had that formula, we can later extrapolate it to the different customers that Carter Machinery has, specifically do-it-yourself customers, and it will automatically update the user interface in question, which if we go into the next slide, this is it right here. It was developed using VBA, so on Excel, and it's very easy to use because there's only one button. So Aman, if you can press that for me.
Sure thing.
There you go. So we got the demand generation engine here. So basically, it's very easy to use. You select the part name you want to look at. So for example, air filters, and then you select the desired threshold. So do we want to look at parts that, or customers that have an air filter with above 80% rate of deterioration to plan for the near term, or below 50% to plan for the long term? You submit that button. Unfortunately, we can't show the output because it includes sensitive information like email addresses and phone numbers and whatnot. But I'll put it right here, and then you can see the view expected demand report, which shows you how many customers are high priority, so above 17% rate of deterioration, medium priority, and low priority. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it on to Aman to talk more about our conclusion.
Thank you, Skander. So in conclusion, as the team has worked on this project over the last 9 months, we have learned so much about this organization and have assessed what their future can hold. Accurate data is the cornerstone to working in a more efficient organization. This provides the organization with the opportunity to make better predictions. As we have stated before, due to the current global supply chain crisis, organizations that are able to make better predictions have a better competitive advantage over those that don't, because they're able to better forecast demand and manage their inventory, as well as communicate with supply chain vendors in order to bolster their inventory before the parts come in due to long lead times. They're also able to have enhanced marketing opportunities. The marketing and sales department, with the use of data analytics, are able to reach out and grab customers earlier than ever before, which will be a huge advantage to them, as well as capturing their competitive advantage. We'll also see increased overall productivity with the organization as a whole, because each department within the organization will be able to communicate more effectively in order to use their skills to foster a synergy in order for Carter Machinery to have its goal to be the #1 Caterpillar dealer of choice. With that being said, to the next slide. With that being said, we would like to thank the CBA team for allowing us to be a part of this wonderful program. We have learned so much, and we will take the skills that we've learned with us to our future endeavors. Cohort 6, thank you so much. With the memories and the support that you have given us will last with us a lifetime. So Cohort 7, some future advice. Definitely take time to network and make connections within this program, because they will truly last a lifetime. Thank you so much. With that said, any questions?
Yes.
What would you consider the most interesting out of your findings and analysis?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think one of the main things that we didn't realize was going to happen is associated with the part sales data set. So that was one of the two main data sets that we used. A lot of that data is manually entered. And so two of the variables that we showed were machine serial numbers and hours of operation. We showed those because those are key in our analyses. You can see 54%, I think it was, of machine hours were potentially labeled as 0. And so that makes it really hard for us to kind of better understand the mean time between failure, like how many hours did a specific customer have on their machine when they came for an air filter the first time, and how many they had the second time, so we can see the difference in hours. So we had to basically come in and use the machine utilization data set, which included a daily reading of their hours every day, and kind of aggregate that, which obviously took a lot longer than doing a simple subtraction between first and second instance. So the erroneous data in the part sales data set was definitely one of the challenging, surprising things that we've come across.
If I can answer a little bit of that too, I think one thing that was very interesting for all of us is that just how kind of rooted in tradition this sales department is, because customer service nowadays is so automated. And so Carter Machinery is still doing part sales over the phone, which I thought is very interesting. But it honestly makes sense because a lot of customers don't like being transferred through automated systems. I know I don't. I personally hate it. And so customers have the unique opportunity to be able to form relationships with people, with actual real people who work at Carter, and they're able, and I think that's very interesting. And I hope that they continue to be able to foster those relationships with kind of using automated systems and being able to, transform the digital transformation efforts. So keeping that tradition while kind of embracing more technology, I think that that's very interesting.
I'd like to add one more thing to that. So we interviewed the sales department and we learned that there's not a lot of motivation with using data analytics to predict when parts will deteriorate. But after developing the model, it was fairly accurate. So we're very confident that it will make a true impact with the organization, just trying to predict parts and just deteriorating as the data becomes more clean and so forth. So yeah.
Any other questions?
Did you guys think about offering solutions to get better data quality, or was that completely out of scope?
Yeah, so we did with the continuous improvement stuff. Now, obviously, this is kind of a surface level view of things, but they have a program called Vision Link, which takes data from the black box of different machines. So utilization data like runtime, idle time, and whatnot. However, the way they kind of distribute that data across the organization to analyze it is quarterly. So they download that data quarterly, and every quarter they kind of give that away to the different departments in the organization. So one easy way to kind of circumvent that is to use an API connection to the Vision Link data using Python, have a data validation system set up using a few lines of code. And from there, that data can be automatically and continuously downloaded into Excel sheets if they would still like to use Excel, and distribute it across the organization. So that's one of the recommendations to circumvent the data issues.
Any other burning questions?
All right, good morning, everybody. Today we'll be presenting our project on the cost analysis of store-to-store transfers. My name is Alejandro Gonzalez.
I'm Zach Davis.
So I'd also like to include our corporate sponsor team of Chuck Reilly, Roger Freisleben, and Samantha Smith. We really want to thank you all for introducing us to this project and being there every step of the way. We really appreciate you guys. I'd like to start today with the problem statement that we tackled for this project. And that was to determine the cost and economic benefit of parts that are being transferred from one store to another. With this project, our goal was to lower transportation costs for the company and kind of see how we can maximize employee usage and reduce and eliminate any redundant costs that the company might be spending on these part transfers. But before we get to the data and analytics, I'd like to cover two key concepts that the company uses for their part transfers. The first is the hub run. And this is just the standardized way Advanced Auto Parts moves their parts from store to store from a central hub store. They use a third-party delivery driver, and a hub store is just simply a regular store with a larger amount of inventory. The other concept is the chase. There are two different types of chases. The first is the hotshot chase, and this is simply when the store sends out an employee in a company vehicle to retrieve a part to either restock in their inventory or to sell to a potential customer. The other is the embedded chase, and the embedded chase is simply just like a hotshot chase, just with the additional step of going directly to the customer after picking up the part from the second store. The time and distance between all these different points was very important for the analysis portion of our project. With that being said, I'd like to now pass it over to Zach to talk about the data.
Thanks, Alejandro. So throughout the project, we were able to get our hands on a lot of different data. And all of this data was very key for us to basically culminate into one table so that we could perform a lot of analysis on this to determine our different costs for the different types of product transfers that we detailed. So first, the two data sets that I wanted to highlight is the store-to-store transfer set and the chasing analysis set. So the store-to-store transfer set actually was something that contained all of the transfers, so hub runs and chases that advanced auto parts completed throughout whatever periods we looked at. So specifically, we looked at periods 9, 12, and 13. So it contained all the transfers for those periods. And then the chasing analysis set was something that contained strictly information detailing chases, which was the extra cost that we wanted to look at in terms of how much it was costing advanced auto. What was key here was we wanted to identify our chases within our store-to-store set. So we didn't necessarily have a way to identify which was which. And we were able to do that through the use of common columns between the two data sets and basically matching these records. So we could see if there was a match, it was a chase. If it wasn't a match, it was a hub run. In addition to these two data sets, we had 4 supplementary data sets that we used in terms of detailing our data a little more clearly in terms of the SKU list. So putting a part name to a certain part ID. So that was key in us detailing patterns of what sorts of items were transferred on hub runs versus chases. We had drive times and drive chases, or drive time of chases. So basically how long it took us to move a part from one store to another, and also that mileage that it took us to go from one store to another, which was key in us determining our different costs for these transfers. Wage rate was something we wanted to detail also as we are sending a store employee out to make this chase. It's key for us to see how much we're paying that employee to perform this sort of task instead of their in-store activities as they should have been. And then the delivery standard is something Alejandro alluded to. This is that unknown amount of time that it takes us to go from store B to that customer. And this is something that we came to the conclusion with the AAP team with, and was an assumption that we thought was very useful in us in our cost equations. I'm now going to pass it off to Sakshi, who's going to detail our analysis a little more.
Thank you, Zach. So as Zach mentioned, we had a lot of data. We had about 1 million records in the store-to-store transfer file and a few 100,000 records in the chasing analysis file. So we decided it would make sense to sample the data, build our analytics process, and then move on to the bigger data sets that we had. We decided that the sampling would be done based on geographical locations, which is what Advanced calls DMAs. So we chose a rural DMA, which is the Roanoke-Lynchburg area, and we chose an urban DMA, which is the Raleigh-Durham-Fayetteville area. This was also helpful in us understanding how the frequency of chases and the parts that are transferred on these chases, how do they differ based on market conditions. Then the bulk of our analysis focused on calculating the cost associated with these additional transfers. And we had multiple discussions with Roger, Samantha, and Chuck, and we decided that there would be 3 components. There would be labor, opportunity, and fuel. So labor is basically the cost associated with sending a store employee out to go get a part. This is basically a store employee who's on the clock, who has certain tasks to do in the store, but will not be available to do those because they're out driving to get a part. The next one is opportunity. So we know, as Alejandro mentioned, hub runs are the standardized way of moving parts in advanced auto. So when they send a person out on a chase, we're basically wasting a part of this investment of this standardized way of moving costs. So that was going to be our opportunity cost. How much money are we actually not utilizing to get parts into stores? And the last one was fuel. As we know, this is a transportation problem and fuel is a rising cost. So we wanted to account for fuel in the total cost of chases. I'll now be passing it on to Annie to talk about the proof of concept.
Thank you, Sakshi. So we know that the chases happen for the pro customers. So even though they add up to a significant amount of the overhead cost, they might not be completely eliminated. So for that reason, we came up with a model that can be used by store managers to determine whether a chase should take place or not. So the model, we decided that the store managers should be the ones to use it, is because they're the ones who are dealing with the customers on a daily basis. So they know the needs and the wants of the customer. We have to keep in mind that this model only takes into account the profit and loss associated with the chase, but it does not take into account the relationship that the store manager has with their pro customer. So the way it works is that the store manager will have to enter the home store number, destination store SKU number associated with the part and quantity. And then the output will be a predicted decision, which will be yes, no, or a manager's decision. So next will be our video demonstration, where you see here the manager will enter the home store number, which is their store. Next will be the destination store number, which is the store where they're going to go pick up the part from. And after that is the SKU associated with the part that they're going to chase. Then the quantity that they're going to chase. And then for this particular example, the response is a no, so the manager will not continue with the chase. Now I'll pass it on to Chris, who's going to go over the recommendations and wrap up the presentation.
All right, thank you, Annie. I'm going to wrap up the presentation by offering 3 key recommendations the team and I were able to come up with for the AAP organization. First is going to be a predictive model pilot that is driven by data. The overview of that would be implemented into a small sample of stores over a short period of time, anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks to help their decision making. Executing a trial of this capacity would help reinforce that this tool could save a significant amount of money. There needs to be a clear-cut decision-making method that says, yes, we can do this chase because it is profitable, and more often than not, it needs to be data-driven. So implementing this type of system would help regulate consistencies between stores and also lower those spur of the moment chases. So in conclusion, that this recommendation, it's emphasizing the cut of unprofitable chases. The next Annie spoke about for a quick moment, and we did not incorporate the relationship between customers and managers into our model. So that is a crucial and tangible variable that it's hard to really quantify in customer service and in retail, but we do believe that if that's implemented as a variable into the model, that it would help further accuracy. Finally, we would like there to be an expansion upon the information and the data related to chases. We were able to look at 3 periods spanning over approximately 12 weeks. We'd like to expand that to 13 periods over an entire year. We just think that that would reinforce our data further and improve accuracy. I'd like to thank everyone for being here today on behalf of my team and Virginia Tech, and we're going to open up the floor to any questions you may have.
When you were determining the window for what would and would not fall under manager's choice, how did you find the balance between statistics and the personal experience of someone who works in the field?
So the way we were able to basically figure out those kind of thresholds was we took a look at distributions based on the costs we detailed throughout the project, and there is basically a way to see a percentage of our chases fell within a certain threshold where we could deem it a positive return on investment in terms of making that chase. And then as we started to look throughout the distribution, there was a clear-cut kind of line where after about this X percentage, it wasn't smart to make that choice anymore. And then so there's kind of a cloudy part between that no and that yes, where kind of a rough percentage of data fell. So we were able to basically say that that was our manager's decision. Anything before that we could say is a no, and then anything after that we could say is a yes.
So I'm just curious, how did you guys include profitability? Was it a assumed level of profitability per chase, or were you actually looking at the SKU level? Which
So that's a great question. So we made the assumption was any chase that we as a advanced auto made, we assumed that that was for a sale that we have already made for a product to a pro customer. So we could basically take that retail sales price that we sold the certain item for, and then that was something we worked down. So we have, retail sales price, and then how much it costs a company to basically acquire that product, how much it costs them to hold it in inventory. And then within us basically detailing how profitable it was, we could then look at the different columns of costs that we determined in addition to those that were already incurred.
House in Roanoke affect your data? The distribution warehouse? Advance's largest distribution warehouse is in Roanoke, on the East Coast is in Roanoke. Did that affect your time and distance data?
There were a few stores which were going to not stores but warehouses, and for those the drive distance and miles they weren't numbers, they were either greater than something or between a range. So we weren't actually able to. We had to make an assumption for those particular records. We would just say, okay, this might be around 75 minutes. This might be around 60 minutes. Or if they were constants, it was easy. But if they fell in like a distribution of that sort, we would have to have discussions with the sponsor and then decide, should we actually include these or should we not? Because when we presented last week, like after we went through the whole presentation, they did say that the numbers you have are a little conservative. So the costs might be actually higher than the analysis that we ended up doing.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. We are the Smithfield team, and we're really happy to be here today because we're about to present you our work of the past 9 months. But it also means that we're about to graduate. So we're going to start off by introducing you the team. My name is Alexis Jordanas, and we also have
I'm Uriel.
And I'm Grant Bomber.
This time, we will also like to thank Dr. Michelle Seref for her contribution to this project. Her help was really essential for us to get to our final deliverables, and we really appreciate you. So looking at the problem statement of this project, we had to find some ways to improve bone-in ham production, the yield of bone-in ham production, but also try to find some ways how we could possibly increase efficiency and improve the production processes. And to get to that point, we had to figure out which were the most influential factors for the yield production of bone-in ham, but also find all the correlations for within the data sets that we received, which included oven performance data, preventive maintenance data, yield performance, and finally we were able to collect some weather condition data and try to find the relationships. Smithfield has about more than 40 production plants all over the country, and we focused on 5 production plants, which mainly focus on the bone-in ham production, which included Martin City, Lincoln, Kingston, Sioux Falls, and Grayson. So these are the 5 production plants that we try to implement our solutions. And to get to our solutions, we started by the exploration phase, where we tried to explore all the data sets that we received and try to do some data cleaning that would be make it easier for us to conduct analysis later on. But also we tried to fully understand the production process of bone-in ham, so we can be able to decide which analysis would be the best to conduct and which would be the best potential solution to the problem. After the exploration phase was done, we started the analysis, where our mainly focus was to try to find the relationships between all the data sets that we had towards the yield. And then after the analysis was over, we started building out our deliverables, where we decided that some dashboards that can be used as a tool would be most beneficial for the company, but also some recommendations that are more based to our statistical findings. And we believe that Smithfield will benefit from our solutions by improving their monitoring processes for yield performance on each production plan, being able to gain more insights on the financial profits or losses for a yield on a weekly basis, and also being able to identify any alarming situations in a timely manner that can help the company make better decisions and also potentially reduce the cost of operation. Now I would like to move on to Yuri with the next part.
Thank you, Alexios. Let me go over the expected economic impact of the implementation. Our team provided the tool to help the company optimize their systems for greater efficiency and lower variability. A better understanding of what factors affect to the yield will help to improve the production of bone-in ham and maintain the good quality of the product over time. Also, the significant cost savings can be expected by recognizing their initial issues of the systems and reducing the inventory spaces through more efficient management. For intangible benefits, by maintaining the consistent quality of the product, the company can maintain the good reputation in the industry as the largest pork producer. And also our solution can save the unnecessary time and help to increase the productivity, since they can directly focus on the key metrics and track their effectiveness of the system in one location from the multiple sources. All relevant data was provided to investigate the impact of key metrics, and all possible factors associated with the yield were considered. The final dashboard directly focused on the key matrices, and we provided the improvement suggestions for the better performance. I'd like to move on to the next part with Ali. He will go over our dashboard.
Thank you, Yuri. Because of the data agreement, we couldn't disclose the analysis result or the dashboard demo, but I try to go through the dashboard. Our first dashboard as a result of this project is the yield dashboard. It can give the management the ability to oversee the performance of each factory yield per week. And there is an ability to drill down through different shifts, different weeks, and see how's it going. We found during our analysis that there is a correlation between the yield performance and the alarm data. So we put a certain place for tracking the alarm to see what's the top priority alarm and act upon that. And generally, we believe that this dashboard can give a management tools to track down the effect that can drastically reduce the yield and solve the issue before it is too late. Next, please. The second dashboard is preventive maintenance dashboard. And in this dashboard, we just show the effect of preventive maintenance performance on the yield. We believe that it can help the management team to track down the trends and things that happen which affect the yield. And in future, they can just tweak the preventive maintenance plan in the way to reach the desired level of yield. Next. The next recommendation is all about the data collection and data quality. We recommend to have more accurate reporting on oven condition. And we believe that this kind of accurate data can make a foundation for the company for further useful analysis. We hope that we have more granular data, live connection data. And during our project, we found that the alarm is one of the key performance indicator showing how the yield gonna happen. And we recommend to extend the alarm system through all the factories, all the products for the Smithfield company. And it can help the company to track down the indicator which impacting the yield the most. Next, going with the grant to wrap up and close the project.
Thank you. One point to reiterate, due to our strict confidentiality clause, we aren't able to talk about the results of our analysis, nor can we show you the dashboards themselves. But to answer the original question posed by Smithfield themselves, can we make ham better? Yes, we can. We can make ham better, statistically and objectively. Wrapping up with some program comments, this is more so advice for the next cohort. I really implore you to take advantage of every single opportunity. There's a wealth of information both in the cohort itself, in the faculty and staff, as well as the university as a whole. Very much take advantage of the opportunity that you are given. Next is ask questions and learn. It may seem obvious, but you don't know what you don't know, popular saying by one of our professors. But the only way to learn that is through asking questions. So I really implore you to ask good questions and learn as much as you can. Be a sponge and absorb all that information. And finally, have a good time. Enjoy Virginia Tech, enjoy Blacksburg, and just make the most of your experience. Now we will open it up to any questions that you may have. Dr. Sarev.
I'm really sorry you can't see their dashboard. It's so good. And without revealing any of the, private information, they did an excellent job of gathering data together, making it user-friendly. The company could see and compare results. It was outstanding. And I had nothing to do with that part. So I was super impressed. So well done, guys.
Far too kind. Thank you. Yeah. One second.
I'm not too sure if you can tell us this, but what part of the process for the ham had like the greatest increase in yield?
Sure. So the three factors we looked at most were preventative maintenance, we looked at inspection data, and we looked at alarms. We ran multiple regression, we did linear regression, and those three factors came out to be the most impactful. I can't say the magnitudes of their impact, but I can say that to answer your $1 million question, we gave them a $36 million answer. Yes.
I'm just curious about, while we can't see the dashboard, was it homegrown, was it programmed, or
Yes.
was it on an existing platform?
So we developed 3 dashboards in Power BI, aggregating 5 different data sources that come from different oven systems, different yield databases, and some other data sets that I can't even mention. But yeah, so we had 5 disparate sources that we connected through Power BI, developed 3 full dashboards, then have templates for 2 that will expand not only to bone-in ham, but to any cook code that uses these 5 oven house systems. Thank you.
Question from Zoom.
Sure.
Question is, what was the most challenging part of the entire process?
We had some challenge during our aggregation process for the data. I mean, the Smithfield can provide a lot of multiple sources, but just different granularity. We need to find how we merge those data into one data set. But we provided the groundwork as a first starting point of the analysis, and also we provided how they could improve in terms of the data or the updated systems, and even we provided the further questions they might be interested in.
I was just gonna say that the data that we received were collected in a different timeline. So the best way to link it and the hardest thing to do was to try a way to bring everything on, like, say, a daily basis or like a weekly basis, and etc. So they can match.
Great presentation. I'd love to see your dashboard too. Under your dashboard, so your final bullet was management reports, right? I believe it was. So under those management reports, usually if you think about an activity times an effectiveness equals a result, right? So upper management focuses on the R, the result. Are you guys measuring the activity? So is the ham cut quicker and that's getting you a bigger yield for people to coach and improve performance or hold accountability? Or is that management report just, yep, we've got more income, let's go to Hawaii?
Sure. Great question. Thank you.
Right.
And without delving too much into the details due to our confidentiality agreement, I can say it really focuses on the cook times and the stages. So when we see alarms come in, currently the process is the line operators correct for that alarm, don't make note of it, and move on with their shift. We don't know if that's happening twice more the next shift, twice more the next shift in perpetuity. This dashboard allows us to say, okay, we see this alarm, not as an isolated instance, but we see it repeated over a short period of time. We are going to flag that as a cause for concern. At that point, we can implement some preventative maintenance or normal maintenance to change how the lines are being cooked, to change the cook process, because there is natural variability with a product such as this. And so it is taking a leading look at the cook process and changing it based on the current environment. Correct. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, I thank you. Oh, Chris Kendall.
Do you believe your dashboards or deliverables are versatile enough to include or trend over to other products? So for example, do you think you can make turkeys better?
I think that's very feasible. We took the specific focus looking at bone and ham because that is the oven data that we had at the time. They're currently implementing systems that will allow this to collect live oven data from every line. And the best part about these dashboards are we built in the templates themselves so that they are able to, all they have to do is click a drop-down filter, select the product code, select the line they want to take a look at, and it will go to anything that goes into an oven at Smithfield. If there are no further questions, I'd like to thank you for your time. Thank you for being here, and congratulations to all the other teams.
Before we get started, I just wanted to emphasize what Jay said a little bit ago before we started originally. There is a high level of confidentiality within our presentation, so there has been some things removed, specifically our tools, as well as our mention of our sponsor's name. Thank you all for respecting this, and we look forward to answering your questions after the presentation. So to begin here, this is the cost analysis of the Towing and Recovery Incentive Program, also known as TRIP, on the I-81 corridor here in Southwestern Virginia. My name is Cole Froelich.
I'm Cole Blaker. I'm Jakob Blumler.
And Lisa Cotodia, our team lead, is unfortunately unable to be with us today, but she's been an invaluable asset during this entire time. And Andy Schott, our faculty advisor, is out in the audience today from VTTI. According to the Virginia Department of Transportation, $1,200 a minute or $72,000 an hour is lost to the Virginia economy for every lane that is shut down on the highway. Why this became such an issue? This did become such an issue that the TRIP program, the Towing and Recovery Incentive Program, was created in Richmond, Virginia in 2018 in order to combat this issue. Since that time, according to our data, as well as other data we've received from several sources, there's an 88% clear rate of 0 to 4 hours on these highway lanes, meaning they're shut down for 0 to 4 hours, 88% of the time. These data sources came from the Virginia Department of Transportation, as well as Parsons, the third-party entity who is currently implementing the TRIP program here in Southwestern Virginia. Now, what makes a TRIP call, you may be wondering? Well, first off, it must involve a commercial vehicle crash. If there is no commercial vehicle crash involved, it is not a TRIP call. Secondly, if there is a commercial vehicle crash that involves a lane closure or a fire, it is immediately supposed to be tripped as a TRIP call. The problem that we came up with was estimating the cost of a new or an existing business in the towing and recovery industry under this new program that has been admitted. Specifically looking at all the TRIP requirements, including the equipment, as well as the training and other long-term costs to the individual companies for both an existing and a new one. And what you will see throughout this presentation is that there's a very high level of startup costs in order to even jump into this industry. So now I'm going to pass it off to Cole Blaker to talk a little bit more about this map here.
Thank you, Cole. So TRIP has divided the I-81 corridor into 14 different zones, with zone 1 starting down here and ending with zone 14 up to towards the north. So most of these zones have 2 companies that operate in them, and with a few having 1. And for those zones that have 2 companies, they actually share responsibility. So one company will have the responsibility for that zone 1 week, and the other company will have responsibility for that zone the next week. So now moving on, I want to talk a little bit about our main inputs we use in our analysis. So the first is that this is a new venture started by someone who has been in the industry. And the reason we're treating it this way is because TRIP has a requirement that you must be in the industry for 2 years prior to applying to join. Now, with that said, this analysis doesn't cover the 2 years prior that a new company would have to do before joining. So just keep that in mind as we move through this presentation. Now, our next input is that this new venture will use TRIP data as its only source of revenue, and we'll have 1 set of TRIP required equipment. And then we'll be using the anticipated case, which I'll get into a little more detail later. Moving on to some more inputs here, we're going to be using the average for our zone, which is taking the average across all those 14 zones and using it in our forecasting method. And then we're also assuming that we're going to be sharing this zone, and this new venture will have 5 operators, 1 supervisor, and 1 office staff member, with those 5 operators and 1 supervisor responding to every TRIP call. So now I want to talk a little bit about our financing inputs. So if a company were to start from scratch here, they would have to spend roughly $2 million just to buy the required equipment. And we're assuming most of these companies are going to have $2 million in liquid capital to start. So we're assuming they're financing this equipment with an annual rate of 10% while putting 10% down and financing it over 7 years. So with that, we would have a down payment of just over $205,000 with a monthly payment of roughly $31,000. So now if we can move on, I'll talk a little bit about the trip incentive structure. So when a company gets a trip call, there are four main things that could come of it. So the first is that they could receive a $2,500 incentive bonus, and this is for meeting all the trip requirements. The next, they could receive a $3,500 incentive for meeting all those requirements, as well as bringing special equipment as per the trip booklet. And then finally, our last two things that could happen is they could receive no incentive and a disincentive, which I'll touch on a little bit here in a second. But what we actually did is we divided the trip data into three categories for the 2,500, 3,500, and no incentive. And we treated no incentive as a category for the no incentive and disincentive, because what the disincentive does, it takes away from the next incentive payment. So after categorizing the data, we took the percentages, and they're actually working as probabilities within the back end of our model. So now if we want to move on, I'll talk about how you actually lose that incentive payment. So there are four main ways you could forfeit the trip payment. So the first is the failure to arrive on scene in the established time. Next, if the required work to open all lanes isn't complete. And then if all lanes are not open within the 90 minutes of being given a notice to proceed, then they will lose the incentive payment. And then finally, if the trip personnel fail to wear the class 3 safety vest, they will lose that trip incentive. So now moving on, we'll talk about the disincentive and how a company actually receives this. So if all lanes are not open within 3 hours of getting that notice to proceed, then the company will receive a flat fee of $600. And if they're not open within 4 hours, then an additional $10 per minute will be charged to that company. And as I said before, this disincentive will take away from their next incentive payments. So now if we can move on, I'll talk a little bit about time categories, which are also from that trip data set. So we categorize crashes into three different categories, with category A being 0 to 4 hours, category B being 4 to 8 hours, and category C being 8 or more hours. And we took those percentages and used them as probabilities within the back end of our model as well. And we used these categories to assign times as well as fuel costs for individual wrecks within our model. And if you look here at the table, you can see how these are assigned. So now I'm going to pass it off to Jakob to talk more about trip cost.
Thank you, Cole. So moving on, let's talk about another big factor. Our analysis was based on the trip costs. So one of the original project objectives here were to display the full cost a newly formed towing venture can expect when entering the industry under the trip guidelines. And as Cole mentioned earlier, it's important to know that there's a very high initial capital investment that trip requires in order for a company to join trip. And we also divided our costs into different categories. We got equipment, facilities, labor costs, administrative costs, tax expenses, and fuel costs. And equipment and facilities are by far the highest cost, as we could attribute about 41% of overall cost to equipment and facilities. So moving on to the next slide, here we can see the total cost over four years that a newly formed towing venture can expect when entering trip. And as I mentioned earlier, so there's a very high initial capital investment in month 0 of $550,000, which also explains a very high number in year 1 of roughly 2 million. And to give a quick insight here, initial costs include things such as fencing costs. It's actually one of the trip requirements to have your property fenced out. There are very high training costs that incur month 0 and all the down payments on trip vehicles. And to reiterate, all these costs incur before you can even start operating on the trip. In year 2, we can see a pretty significant drop due to these initial costs dropping out. And in year 3 and 4, we see a slight increase due to factors such as salary growth. So that's it from the trip costs. I'm going to pass it back to Cole to talk about our estimation of wrecks.
Thank you, Jakob. So we consulted with a subject matter expert on how to go about forecasting wrecks within Excel. So after consulting with our subject matter expert, we actually came up with using simulation. And what simulation allowed us to do was input cases within our model for each individual zone, as well as the average across all zones. So if you look here at the table, you can see this is the three cases for the number of wrecks per year for the average across all zones, assuming it is shared. So the first case here is the high case. We used the 99th percentile, which came out to 42 wrecks per year.
For the anticipated case, we used the 50th percentile, and this is actually what we based our analysis off of, which came out to 29 recs per year. And for the low case, we used the first percentile, which came out to 17 recs per year. So now we're passing it back to Cole to talk about our break-even analysis.
Thank you, Cole. So one of the big questions you're probably all wondering is, there's very high level of startup costs. How and when am I going to see a break even, if not a profit? So here we did not only a break even, but also a 20% profitability rate in both year 2 and year 4. And the reason we did it this way is that TRIP contracts are 2-year contracts to be renewed with the state. So if you want to see a break even in that year, in that first 2-year contract, there must be 198 billable hours at approximately $16,000 an hour in order to break even. Now, if you want to see a 20% profit margin, you would be doing that same 198 billable hours at about $20,000 an hour. Compare that to year 4 with an expected cumulative of 396 billable hours at $15,000 to break even and $19,000 to get that 20% profitability rate. The reason that I bring up this break-even analysis is that we cannot recommend to either a new business or an existing business to use TRIP as a feasible or primary revenue source. The reason for this is that there's no control over the number of wrecks on the highway. Secondly, as Cole mentioned, we are assuming that there's only one set of TRIP equipment. One of the requirements within the TRIP program is that your TRIP equipment must be on standby and ready for a call at all times, essentially turning these companies into fire services sitting on the lot waiting for a call. The final thing we wish to highlight once more, as I said in the beginning, the Virginia Department of Transportation estimates that $72,000 an hour is lost to the Virginia economy for every hour that a lane is shut down. Compare this to the $19,000 an hour billable rate for the towing and recovery profitability over a 4-year period, and you can see that these numbers, unfortunately, it's not profitable currently for the companies, and in order to see that profit, there would need to be a change to the program. Thank you all so much for your time, and we will now administer questions.
Yes.
Did your break-even data account for collectability problems?
Yes, ma'am, it did. We actually did thank you for your question. We did, within our tool, there's a 20% bad debt rate accounted for, which is what we've contributed or what we've received from people within the industry, as well as third-party instigators who are helping to put this program into effect.
And off that, we additionally added a litigation contingency to account for going to court with these companies that aren't paying. Yes.
So I'm wondering, based on your outcome, is one of the recommendations that VDOT or the government subsidize entry into this market to improve response rates and reduce the lane closures?
That is an excellent question. So we did discuss this, and we decided that we would not consider that idea because there are so many towing and recovery vehicle companies already in Virginia attempting to get into this program that subsidization is something that would be so hard to sell to these contractors as well as to the government agencies who see this as a saving point. As we mentioned, the 88% number, that 0 to 4 hour crash rate, it's incredible. It just shows that this program works. It's just financially not feasible for those involved currently. So a lot of the people who are involved with that industry must run a secondary side business in order to break even.
And if I could add to that, if VDOT was our client, that might have been one of our recommendations. However, we're looking at it from a different perspective than VDOT itself. Yes. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Sorry, how long is this?
So yeah, it was implemented in 2019 in Richmond, and it's fairly new here in the Southwest Virginia region. It was implemented in May 2021, so it's fairly new.
And I'm not sure, isn't there, I mean, and I don't keep up with this, but an expansion of 81 coming at some point, or is that?
I don't know if it's an expansion to 81, or I think there might be a new interstate coming. I'm not 100% sure on that one. Oh, they're widening it, I think, a little bit. So I think that's the kind of the expansion part. They're widening the roadway.
Other than concluding that it was not profitable, what suggestions do you have to make it so that it would be profitable?
Absolutely. I'd love to take that. So the first thing is that we would need to see some kind of legislation and or some kind of protection for the towing and recovery vehicle companies that are getting hurt by either year-long litigation battles to get their money or just strictly not receiving any of that monetary transaction. And the issue is that one of the things that we may not have mentioned is that you are called to these calls immediately, and there is no promise that these insurance companies that may be something we also missed. The insurance companies are technically the ones who are supposed to be paying out the trucking companies because it is their accident. However, the issue that comes along that we mentioned is that you either begin litigation battle because they don't wish to pay the number that they don't feel is fair, or they don't have that level of insurance and they can't afford it. Thank you so much for that question. So our main recommendations would definitely be to change the incentive program in order to better incentivize these companies to come to these calls. Another thing that we didn't mention was that this program did begin its implementation during COVID. So there was a lot of, maybe it was put back on the back burner because there was a lot of other more pressing issues at the time. So we think that there should be a retraining of not only trip guideline, not only the trip operators, but also the Virginia State Highway Troopers, as well as the any other police that are involved in making these trip calls. Thank you.
Okay, so that sort of leads into, you said that the towing companies are called out immediately. What if there's a fatal accident and there needs to be an investigation? How does that turn around and bite them too?
So the way this actually works, so there's a running clock once they get on there. And when I mentioned the notice to proceed, they'll be given a notice to proceed after such like an investigation like that is done. And then that's when their clock will start for that 90 minutes to 3 hours. Any more questions?
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all.
All right, so we're the VT Athletics capstone team. My name's Tyler. This is Matt. Tess. All right, so I'm Tyler. This is Matt. And Pat and Oscar weren't able to come today. Next slide. So just to introduce you guys to our advisors, the first. All right, so the first being Danny White. He's one of the associate athletic directors here at Virginia Tech. We have bi-weekly meetings with him, and he's been able to connect us to a lot of great people. Jay Winkler, obviously you guys know Jay. He's been very involved with our project and has been a huge help. Third, David Teagarden. He is our faculty advisor, also been a great help. And Corey Jez, which is our connection to the outside world. Currently the director of analytics for Austin FC and used to work with the Utah Jazz. So the first thing we wanted to do when we were tasked with this project is figure out what Virginia Tech is doing with analytics right now and what some of our competitors might be doing. So we were able to sit down and meet with Ryan Nato from basketball, Ryan Fecto and Kyle Saracen from baseball, Brian Jackson from football sports science, Jake Shell from football performance analytics, Grant Duncan from Hockey Club, and Ron Dixon, Kelly Murphy from strength and conditioning for the sports that aren't football or basketball, Allison Onion from nutrition, and lastly, Leigh from Notre Dame. She's an associate athletic director involved with analytics. She was hired on to focus more on the revenue side of analytics in the athletic department, but she actually just made a hire of another athletic director about a month ago that's going to be more involved with the in-game analytics. So that's exciting for Notre Dame. It's great to find out what they're doing and apply that to us. And so, of course, we weren't able to meet with a representative from every team here at Virginia Tech, so we decided to send out a survey and at least get a feel for what some teams are doing. We broke it into 3 tiers, low, medium, and high. On the low tier, we have men's tennis and men's and women's swim and dive. In medium, we have the golf programs, softball, and the soccer programs. And in high, we have football, men's basketball, baseball, and volleyball actually does a lot with analytics. Pass it on to Matt now.
So after meeting with these teams, we saw a value in building out a centralized analytics capability for improved sports performance. Currently, there's schools using analytics for revenue generation purposes, but we don't see them using it for improved sports performance at the department level. And so getting into some of the main applications of analytics for sports improved sports performance, we have player acquisition. So how can we use data and analytics to recruit undervalued talent and bring them to Virginia Tech? Time savings. So an analytics capability would provide our coaches with streamlined reports and insights that they're currently building by hand, allowing them to spend more time on the field coaching their players and less time building these reports. Game strategy, so how can we use data and analytics to better prepare for our opponents, as well as make better decisions in games? And then finally, how can we use data and analytics to better develop our players and make them better on the field? So moving on to our analytics solution, we decided that we wanted to create a proof of concept that would show the value and the realm of what's possible for sports analytics at Virginia Tech. And we did this by focusing on the Virginia Tech football team, specifically sports science data. So currently they're using Stat Sports, which is a software that is worn on a player's chest, and it tracks heart rate and some other metrics. And so we collected this data from the director of sports science with the football team, and we built out a dashboard that serves as a proof of concept, like I said, to show the value of sports analytics. And this is really focusing on a player's fitness. And so coaches would interface with this dashboard by selecting a shirt number here, and then it would drop down all the numbers of the players, and they would be able to select a player and see the data related to that player. So here we have Cole Blaker, one of our favorite players on the football team. So just going through some of these metrics, we have dynamic stress load, which is a fatigue index. So coaches could use this to track a player's fatigue from one session to the next. In the top right, we have high metabolic load distance, which is a intensity index. So a coach could use this to ensure a player is reaching a certain level of intensity, but not being overworked. In the bottom left, we have high stress running, which is the total distance a player covers above 5.5 meters per second, which is considered to be a hard sprint. And so a coach could use this to ensure that a player is not sprinting too much before a game. And in the bottom right, we have step balance, which shows a coach the proportion of weight a player is putting on their right and their left leg. And so if they see a spike to 60% on a player's right leg, that might mean that their left leg is injured and they're trying to keep weight off of it. And so they should really check in with that player and make sure they're healthy. Getting into the enterprise analytics solution, kind of the macro look at analytics at Virginia Tech. Each of our teams collect data from external data sources. And so this would be then stored in a centralized database. And we'd have data analysts who would then build out reports based on what coaches are interested in and different metrics. And then our coaches would easily interface with this and wouldn't have to spend time building out these reports themselves. Getting into the benefits of an investment in sports analytics, we had to understand, what is the return on investment here? And really, it's our teams winning more games. And so to understand that return on investment, we have to understand what a win is worth. And so we did this by looking at a Harvard Business School study where they looked at 117 Division I schools across an 11-year period. And these teams had both football and basketball programs. And they tracked their success in terms of wins as well as their revenue across this period. And through some statistical calculation, they determined that one NCAA football win is worth about $3.5 million worth of revenue, and one NCAA basketball win is worth $337,000 worth of revenue. And so while there's other benefits that fall under a capability of analytics at Virginia Tech, ultimately we want to help our teams to win more games.
Yeah, so like Matt said, all of our benefits really do tie into winning as much as possible. Okay, so the first being increased revenue. If we add one college football win in a given season, add an 8% increase, that's a 3% increase in revenue right there. That can come in the form of ticket sales, concession sales, merchandise sales, or donations to the athletic department. Second would be time savings. So we really want our coaches helping these players get better, develop, and then perform better. We want an analytics department feeding these coaches solutions that they might be able to take advantage of. Third, less injuries. There's a negative 0.5 correlation between NFL injured reserve appearances and winning percentage. So in sports, and especially football, staying healthy is super important. And when our athletes do get hurt, then we want to get them on the field quickly, but only when they're ready so we can avoid re-aggravation. Fourth, improved recruiting. Just having an analytics capability can be a big difference maker for somebody that's choosing between Virginia Tech or a comparable school. And then lastly, the development of athletes. And this ties back into the time savings a lot. We want these athletes getting better, working with the coaches, performing better, getting more professional opportunities, which is great for the reputation of Virginia Tech, which is going to lead to more money coming in, which is going to lead to more winning. And that's really the theme of all of these benefits. So some of the costs of our proposed solution at the top of the food chain here would be an analytics director. Working below the analytics director, we think it'd be a good idea to hire 3 or 4 assistant directors. So this could be like a web developer, a data engineer, an analysis specialist. And working with the assistant directors, we think it would be a great idea to take advantage of the strong talent pool we have at Virginia Tech and hire undergraduate interns and graduate assistants. And then there's other costs that are quite variable at this point, includes things like PP&E, equipment, consulting, tech, data buys, and those kinds of things. So now I'll pass it off to Matt to wrap us up with the conclusion.
Thanks, Tyler. So ultimately, the main goal of a sports analytics capability at Virginia Tech is to provide our coaches with better information that allows them to make better decisions that leads to more wins. And analytics is really driving the way that coaches and front offices make decisions at the professional level. And we see this trickle down into college sports has already begun. So it's important for Virginia Tech to act now to be a leader of the pack in terms of sports analytics, as well as gain a strong competitive advantage over our opponents. As we commit more resources and individuals to sports analytics, we'll discover patterns and trends that will change the way that we make decisions at Virginia Tech. And so an investment in sports analytics is more than just an investment in short-term benefits, but an investment in long-term success for our programs. That being said, we appreciate your time and listening to us talk about our project, and we're happy to answer any questions you have about sports analytics.
For the sports analytics? I mean, is it just how on PCs or is this mobile app? I mean, what did y'all research any of those implementations on?
Yeah, so the way that a centralized department level sports analytics capability would work at Virginia Tech is the interface would be built by employees. And so we have all of these data streams from, each team probably has 3 or 4, and we didn't really get into this just because it's a shorter presentation. So all of these different ways of collecting data are different softwares that teams are already paying for. And so this would just really be a way of aggregating all that data together. And one of the main benefits that comes with that is if you shift using different softwares, currently you lose that data. It goes when you stop paying for it. So we can house that data. We can ensure that we maintain that across many years.
Yeah, so a lot of times they say, especially being on paper.
Yeah, so sports isn't completely fair to play on paper. So really what we want here is the analytics department fueling the coaches. Oh, sorry. We want the analytics department providing the coaches with solutions that they can use how they prefer to. We don't want the analytics department telling the coaches what they need to do. It's what they offer.
And one thing we found with a lot of these teams, whether it was through the survey or meeting with them, is some of the the sports that don't generate as much revenue, they're interested in using analytics, but they don't have the resources to invest in it currently. And so by building out a system at the department level, it offers these resources to teams that want to use them, but they just can't budget it currently. Yeah, that's correct. And you bring up Whoop. The football team's already currently working through figuring out how they want to use Whoop, to understand a player's recovery and different things like that. So all of those things can be incorporated in a centralized system. Yeah, they're definitely very excited about using that. Any other questions?
So, hi everyone. Thank you all for coming to this presentation of the Lockheed Martin Twitter Analytics tool. We'll dive right into a quick introduction. First, we have Aaron Mendelson. He was our software development lead. Next, we have Davis Franklin. He was our user interface and user experience lead. Myself, I was project management lead, Rakamuna, and then we had Will Vaughn, who was our data science lead. Now, for this presentation, we're going to talk about the space that Lockheed Martin occupies in defense contract acquisition and where our analytics tool was able to provide some benefit. So we'll be talking about where the tool was when we received it at the end of last year's project, and where we've been able to take it and what additions and improvements we've been able to make. So we'll go into, we'll do a quick tool walkthrough so that you can see some of the features and functions of the tool, and then we'll summarize some of the key takeaways to close us out. So the big question, can Lockheed Martin use social media data to gain a competitive advantage in contract acquisition? So as most of us know, Lockheed Martin's been around a while and they've had a lot of success at winning contracts. So the thing is, in the space that they occupy, it's dominated by several very large players competing for a very limited number of contracts. So in a space like this, competitive advantage can mean the difference between millions and even billions of dollars. So where does our tool come in? Well, in recent years, social media has been exploding and shows a lot of potential for business intelligence. Now, we received our tool at a very prototype level, so we dealt specifically with Twitter data. But for this project, we sought to develop a tool that could comb through Twitter and collect and analyze on relevant users and topics to provide business intelligence and, in turn, competitive advantage. So with that said, I'm going to pass it off to Will to talk about where the project was when
Thanks,
we
Rocco.
received it.
So this project was actually a continuation of the work started by last year's team. They created a prototype of this Twitter analytics tool, and this is the general design. Okay. So the prototype used a tool called Wisdom that created static CSVs of all the collected tweets that they gathered from specified government officials and competitor organizations. It would then take those collected tweets and apply a relevancy model, which would assign a score of 0 or 1 to indicate irrelevant or relevant, respectively. And after that, it would apply a topic model, which would extract keywords from the tweets and create topic buckets, which would further help gather and summarize the content of the tweets. Once the models were applied, the app was ready to be used. Its primary feature was a user search function. This function would take a user handle and a date range, and then it would give you a table of all the relevant tweets in that time frame from that user, as well as the primary topic buckets that the user would use over time. So after evaluating the prototype, we found some target areas for improvement. The first was to create a stronger backend model. The second was to create a user interface for Lockheed that's similar to what they're already using. The third was to create additional dashboards to increase the utility that the app would offer. And the fourth was to create and combine all these other tasks to create a production grade final deliverable. And with that, I will pass it off to Aaron to talk about our solution.
Thanks, Will. So this is the new improved structure of the Twitter analytics tool using the architecture diagram that was shown earlier. A lot of the processes are the same, but the methodologies of those processes have been upgraded to that production quality level. Starting off with the tweets, we still do an automated daily poll, but instead of using Wisdom, we poll directly from the Twitter API using a S3 bucket as like a middleman. So those tweets then go through a similar process of getting scores, but I want to focus mainly on the additional insights. We moved away from the topic model because we felt that, they were pigeonholing tweets into buckets that couldn't necessarily fit. We were concerned as our data grew that those buckets would become nondescript. So instead, we implemented a tagging system that allowed every single tweet to speak for themselves and give a more unique flavor to what kind of analysis that Lockheed Martin end users can do. Additionally, we added a sentiment score, just kind of giving a general feeling of how positive or negative a statement is. And we have reworked the relevancy model. We no longer treat it as a yes or no question, but treat relevancy on a spectrum. So instead of a 0 or 1, we apply a score between 0 and 1 and allow end users to make the decisions themselves. Then the tweets and their metrics are housed in a Elasticsearch index, which is essentially a server that allows us to ask a wider range of queries and get them answered fairly fast. This is one of the bigger updates to that production quality that we were aiming to achieve, and culminating in that is the final tool. As you can see, we have made upgrades to the user analysis dashboard you'll see in the screenshots, but we've also added 3 new dashboards: a topic analysis dashboard, a competitor analysis dashboard, and a commodity analysis dashboard. And all this is really meant to show is the flexibility that our upgrades have provided to the tool and how Lockheed Martin can utilize them. And now I'm going to pass it off to Davis to do the tool walkthrough.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So in order to really highlight the work that we've done on this project, we want to go ahead and give a walkthrough of where the tool was when it was handed to us and where we were able to take it. So on screen here is a screenshot of what the tool looked like when it was given to us. We can see the user search function present at the top of the screen, as well as the date range. We can see the relevancy capability, which is highlighted by this relevant tweets button. I know it's kind of hard to see, but upon clicking that, all of the relevant tweets from the user input would be displayed there. And just under that, in the conversation topics section, is where all the main topic buckets for that user would be displayed. Now, this is a screenshot of where the user is presented when they open our app. So as you can see, it looks much different, and it looks a bit more polished than the proof of concept version that last year's team was tasked to create, as we were really tasked with taking this tool to the next level. So upon opening the app, we are presented with an about page, which gives the users an idea of what they can expect to see on each one of the dashboards. This sort of just helps to guide users through the process to help mitigate some of the stress that can come with opening something that's unfamiliar to them. As we can see, that's the highlighted on screen is the description of just the welcome, and this similar thing is presented on all the other tabs. Moving on, we have an overview dashboard, which really serves to just provide an overview of what the Twitter sphere has looked like over 4 specified date ranges, being the last month, the last 3 months, the last 6 months, and in the last year. Here we can see that in each one of these tabs, we're presented with the most active users from that time period by the number of tweets that they had in that time period, as well as the most common topics by the number of mentions in all of the tweets in that time period. Moving on to our first core functionality of our tool, we have our user analysis dashboard. This features the same sort of architecture that was used in the prototype solution. However, we have made significant upgrades, such as allowing our users to select users from a dropdown rather than remembering a specific Twitter user's handle off memory. And we're also allow analysis on groups of users rather than just one specific user. We also included our date range to be optional, just in case there was a specific event that the user wanted to search for. And we also give users the option to sort all of the tweets by either the relevance score or by the date range, or the recency of the tweets. Presented here, we are then presented with the most common topics for those users, and this would be useful for allowing the user to see what the main topics of conversation are for either one user or a group of users. And then we are also presented with all of the tweets from those users. As we can see here, these 3 folks were the ones selected in the dropdown on the previous slide, and all the relevant scores from their tweets are presented on the right side of the screen. Moving on to our second core functionality, this is our topic analysis dashboard. As we can see here, the user is able to search for any term that they so desire. So in this example, they are searching for Javelin missile, which is one of Lockheed's core products. They are then given similar date options as the user analysis dashboard, but the difference here is they are presented with the trend over time for that topic, which can be useful for tracking spikes or if there was any sort of notable event that somebody might want to take note of. Additionally, we have the top users tweeting about that topic, so that anybody in Lockheed Martin can know who they can go to talk to if there is some sort of buzz around a particular product or topic of interest. They are then presented with a similar table of tweets, just like the user analysis dashboard, where we can see all of these tweets mention something either related to the Javelin missile or the Javelin missile itself, as the terms themselves are flexible as they return related results and not just ones that are specific to the exact search terminology. And then similar to the user analysis dashboard, we have the relevant score of all of those tweets highlighted there. Additionally, we have 2 other dashboards, which are the competitor analysis dashboard, which we really view as an extension of the user analysis dashboard. However, we're not showing that, as it really is just a way that we can enhance the user search function to look at all of Lockheed's main competitors, as well as the commodity analysis dashboard, which we view as an extension of this topic analysis dashboard, in which we are tracking the trend over time, the main users tweeting about it, and all of the tweets about various commodities that are used in Lockheed Martin's production process. And with that out of the way, I'm going to pass things back over to Rocco to wrap us up.
Thank you, Davis. So there were several key takeaways from this project. We believe that our biggest accomplishment was being able to take a prototype proof of concept tool and develop it into a fully functional production ready application. We were able to develop a brand new graphical user interface, replace the back-end model with a stronger relevancy model, and even improve upon our data sourcing. And in replacing the new model, we were very happy with the strength we were able to gain from that, and we believe with future development of the tool, that strength will only increase. Additionally, while working on this project, we were able to confirm that there is in fact relevant and useful information that can be found on Twitter for Lockheed Martin. And last but not least, we were able to lay out the groundwork for expansion of the tool into various other forms of social media, which we believe will increase the business intelligence and, again, in turn, the competitive advantage for Lockheed Martin. Now, just a little bit of advice for any future cohort members. Our advice is to start now, start thinking about the things that you're interested in this field, really explore that. And again, this is a great program. You have a lot of great resources, a lot of great people that will help you whenever you need that. And just take the time to learn it, not just the content, but also, learning how to comport yourself in a professional manner, dealing with people, and so on. And last, enjoy the experience. I know I speak for the team. We all did. Thank you.
So I know like one big thing that's really popular right now within social media is the focus on privacy with data. So what are some of the steps that Lockheed is taking to ensure user privacy?
Yeah, so one big thing to notice is like these are not like individual accounts. This is a curated list of official government accounts. These aren't just like, we aren't just expanding it to everyone. A big upside of that is, we lose a lot of risk of getting misinformation from false accounts. So, the accounts that the last year's team developed and we added onto is curated for just professional business accounts only.
So what software did you use to develop your model and your tool?
It's mainly Python. All of it's Python. We developed it within a tool called Domino, which is just how Lockheed gets these apps up on like their servers, but 100% written in Domino. I mean Python. Yes.
How did you do the tagging to calculate the relevancy?
So for the tagging and developing the training data, it really required somebody to go in and manually decide whether or not a tweet was relevant or not. So, for this, we were able to expand from, I think the last cohort had done about 400 tweets. They had labeled 400 tweets. We labeled 10,423. So we greatly expanded the training data.
Don't let him be modest. Him alone read and labeled 10,000 tweets.
So not to understate this, a big reason why we were able to get the accuracy increases that we were able to get to be able to change the architecture of our model and gain some more relevant results was because of this data increase. And that was one of the bigger goals that we had. You can't train a model off 400 tweets. So just that increase alone to 10,000, hopefully future cohorts and future projects just increase that number. Thank you, guys.
Hi, everyone. We're the NASA Capstone team. To introduce ourselves, I'm Isabella Girardi.
I'm Abby Rigatti.
I'm Sarah Lubno.
I'm Jay Carey. I'm Kieran Higgins.
And we'd also like to give a special thanks to our faculty advisor, Dr. Carlson, as well as our sponsors, Ed McLarney and Christina Hames, for their help throughout this project. Today, we will be going over the 2 transformation use cases that we've worked on this year, along with our work with their enterprise-wide adoption efforts. Now I'm going to pass it off to Abby to go over our problem statement.
Thanks, Izzy. So as Izzy touched on, NASA is looking for a way to measure their digital transformation progress moving into the future in order to help them increase efficiency and meet mission demands. In order to do this, we looked at 2 specific digital transformation projects that are currently in progress. The Mike's project and the Cynical project, as Izzy mentioned. After looking at these 2 projects, we developed both project-specific and enterprise-wide recommendations to help them increase their measurement in the digital transformation progress. We believe with increased measurement, we will be able to help them better gauge where they are in their transformation journey and maximize their impact. I'm now going to hand it over to Jake to talk about EDP Cynical.
Thanks, Abby. So EDP Cynical is essentially just an intelligent search engine. We wanted to track the solution in 3 different ways by measuring adoption. First, we have rollout preparedness, which will track through the functionality of the platform and also measuring employee buy-in. Next, we have quantitative metrics, which are some are planned and then some we plan to track once the visualizations are implemented. And then last, we have qualitative metrics, which are mainly tracked through employee sentiment. And now I'll pass it off to Kieran to start off the analysis and recommendations.
Thanks, Jake. So getting into rollout preparedness, talking about the functionality of the capability, we believe that it should be fully functional or as close to possible as fully functional at rollout. This is just to deter unsuccessful trials early on when you're using it. If a user goes on there and it's like half functional and they don't really understand how to use the capability, they'll be less likely to repeat and use it later on down the road and possibly go back to old tactics of finding the information they need to find. And also, the Cynical contract is a flat rate. So the more users that come back and increase usage in users will give you a better return on your investment as a whole. And I'm going to pass it over to Jake for internal marketing.
Thanks, Kieran. So to internally market the platform, we think that there should be a demonstration video shown to all employees within NASA. Within this video, we think success stories of some users who have already used the platform should be shared, along with some of the just more general benefits of the platform. And last, we expect it to be nearly free, just an investment of employee time. And now I'll pass it off to Izzy to cover the quantitative metrics.
Thanks, Jake. In addition to the metrics planned by the Cynical team, we also recommended tracking user information per search metrics and new versus returning users to better see how well this capability is being adopted across NASA. Since we didn't have access to user search data at the time, we created our own simulated data to create this dashboard that can ultimately be used to visually track adoption progress in real time once that data has been provided. Now I'm going to pass it off to Abby to go over our qualitative metrics.
Thanks, Izzy. So as Jake mentioned, when looking at qualitative metrics in terms of the EDP Cynical project, we really focused on employee sentiment and how the specific tool is meeting the needs of the employees. So one way of measuring this is an end of search survey that will display 3 to 5 questions about the success of that specific search, and then would be measured with the 5-point Likert scale of how much the employee either agreed or disagreed with that specific statement. A more in-depth way to track this would be using AI facial recognition while an employee is using the tool, and it would measure their emotional responses. Some other considerations as far as qualitative metrics would be the implementation of focus groups with multiple employees to share tips and tricks as to how they use that tool. And then also an added benefit could be employee contentment and the overall improvement of an employee's day-to-day activities. So that concludes our discussion on EDP Cynical, and we're now going to be moving into Mike's. So modern and inclusive collaboration spaces are meant to bridge the gap between at-home workers and in-person workers and encourage teamwork. So for our research plan for Mike's, we had a heavier focus on training because NASA has a heavier focus on teaching employees what this tool can do. So for training, we focused on how they were implementing the training and then surveying directly about the training. For the spaces themselves, we delved into software considerations they should have inside the room and then hardware that could enhance the experience for employees. Lastly, we want to maximize adoption. So we measured usage and then also how the adoption is related back to training. I'm now going to hand it over to Sarah to talk about our analysis and recommendations.
Thanks, Abby. So as Abby just mentioned, we focused our recommendations for this implementation on the training. We recommended that NASA did just-in-time training. That way the information was fresh in their mind upon usage of the spaces, so that their process of getting the space set up was as seamless as possible. We also suggested FAQ-style modules, or questions that we figured would come up in the time that maybe they would just be starting to use the space or right before they use the space, that we could just quickly give them a short video that would get them rolling. And then we also, for the training, advise a survey at the end of the training modules. We would also use the same 5-point Likert scale. Some questions we thought we could ask would be, if the training improved the outlook on the spaces, how likely you are to suggest using these spaces after completing the training, if you felt like it was a good use of your time to complete the training, and how successful you feel to complete a meeting in these spaces. Then using these surveys, we figured we could implement some A/B testing by just changing a certain variable. One of the main ones we looked at was changing the length of the video clips, so whether it's the bulk training or the shorter modules, and just using those same surveys, comparing sentiment results, and seeing which training method was most effective for these employees. And now I will pass it off to Jake to get into physical implementation.
Thanks, Sarah. So we split the physical implementation into 2 sections, software and hardware. As for software, NASA's already a predominantly Microsoft 365 organization, but we did want to just check some of the other platforms and see what they had to offer. Although they had some benefits over Microsoft 365, we recommend maintaining the use of 365 because it has the lowest cost and also the highest familiarity across NASA. And now I'll pass it on to Kieran to cover the hardware.
For the hardware section and the mic spaces, we believe that an OWL Pro will be very beneficial. This is basically about the height of this microphone here, and about the width of just like a portable Bluetooth speaker. It resembles an owl, and it also is a 360-degree camera view of the entire room. You place it in the middle of a table, and if someone is speaking, the camera will pan over to them, and when someone else speaks, it pans over to them, so it's as if you're moving your head back and forth within the space. And if multiple people are speaking at once, it'll give you a split screen view, and then you can speak as well just right from it, and people will hear you in the middle of the table. This is just because in the hybrid environment, it's very hard for remote users to feel included, and it promotes collaboration within the remote user and makes them feel as in the space as they possibly can. I'm going to pass it to Izzy for measuring space usage.
Thanks, Kieran. We recommended that they have a set implementation plan for measuring space usage prior to the rollout of these spaces. This includes tracking overall adoption progress, then diving deeper into measuring the usage and sentiment of the specific spaces, and having a plan for tracking this information at each specific NASA location, whether that be through key swipe entry, sign-in screens inside the space, or tracking software logins. We created simulated data and a dashboard again for this project, so they will be able to track adoption progress visually as soon as these spaces have been rolled out. To go into our work with enterprise-wide adoption, we first created a digital transformation model that acts as a roadmap for tracking adoption and transformation NASA-wide, then analyzed the 2 use cases that we've talked about today, and finally proposed mission-consistent metrics based on those use cases, which Kieran will talk more about now.
Thanks, Izzy. So for the mission consistent metrics and the enterprise-wide standpoint, we really wanted to make sure that if there's a new digital transformation effort being implemented, you want to have some sort of foundation that you can use across all the different efforts to track. So we have adoption, employee sentiment, as well as return on investment. Adoption is just tracking user statistics, such as what type of user is using the capability currently, if there's repeat users, the job title of users, maybe the user, what center they're at. Employee sentiment is focusing on the surveys and the focus groups that could potentially be handled, and they would be just getting employee feedback, seeing what works, what doesn't, what they think can improve it. And then return on investment is just taking these metrics all together and seeing what the best return on the investment overall would be and how to incorporate that to make it even better down the road. I'm going to pass it on to Jake for an economic analysis.
Thanks, Kieran. So for economic analysis, we wanted to focus on monetary savings, time savings, and increased efficiency. When considering the EDP Synequa platform, if by consolidating use to one platform, NASA would save costs on other platform subscriptions. As far as the Mike's benefits, we don't see direct benefits as a lot of it requires training, but we predict that the cost will pay off in the end. Next, by implementing automation, it will reduce the non-value adding activities that employees have to do and allow them to focus on some more mission specific goals. And then lastly, the CBA and NASA relationship over the years, we think that we've developed a strong connection and that it would take more time and money to develop the trust and get those materials together that have been required throughout this project if they were to choose someone else. And now I'll pass it back to Kieran to wrap us up with the conclusions.
Thanks, Jake. So for the conclusion, we just think that NASA has a great foundation for the future moving forward within these two projects, as well as digital transformation down the road. Just an enterprise-wide standpoint and taking the broad perspective, it really just looks like very good for them moving forward. Trying to move into the new space with the hybrid workspace as well from what COVID presented with everyone that works in the forces. And so then for the final MSBA impact, we just want to thank everybody here. This has been an awesome experience. We learned so much, especially having to think critically with squishy problems rather than having a direct blueprint on what actually has to be done. Working together collaboratively and just making the relationships with everybody here. It's been a fantastic time. Now we're going to open it up for questions.
I have a very in the weeds question, so whether or not you remember this, I don't know. When you were talking about A/B testing, you specifically said something about video. I'm just curious, did you find a sweet spot on the length of time for videos that were best?
I would say no, as we didn't actually conduct the A/B testing. This is more recommendations for NASA to conduct the testing. So no, I don't have an answer to that question. Thank you.
All right, one thing I would like to say is kind of referencing what I talked about earlier. You saw some great presentations today. Team's done fantastic work. But if you had had the privilege, like myself and Dr. Christie and others, seeing the real details and how far they went into this and how hard they practiced to get to the point of presenting to their sponsors and today, it's really a phenomenal journey, and we're really, really proud of the students. Now we're going to shift gears here. Whenever Luke gives me the thumbs up, we asked everybody for a quote. Remember, this is where you're going to see him again. Okay? So this is sort of your graduation day, if you will. We should have put it on the big screen out here. It's going to be on the small screen. So everybody's thinking like, oh God, what did I say in my quote? Was that a good one, a bad one, or? Okay. I think some of you enjoyed that. Okay, so now we're going to, in part two, we're going to ask all the students to stand up and go kind of line up. Try and get yourself sort of alphabetical order over there. But we're going to call you across. So this is your final exam of the semester, okay? Can you get yourselves in alphabetical order? All righty. You guys ready to get going here? I think you can figure it out. First, Samaida Ahmed. Congratulations. See if you did it right. Skander Belgiff. Cole Blaker. Jakob Blumler. Grant Bomber. And I will mention, watch yourself up here. This cord it jumped out and grabbed a few people already today. Jake Carey. Lucas Carlisle. Brian Chu. Cal Clary. Curtis Cooper. Ashley Cruz. Zach Davis. Ali Degampour. Davis Franklin, who I think I could listen and talk to all day long. Cole Froelich. Isabella Girardi. Asher Glenn. Alejandro Gonzalez. Not her fault. Annie Gosselin. Matt Grafe. Kieran Higgins. Chris Kendall. Jan Kim. Sarah Lubno. Sakshi Mankame. Aaron Mendelson. Rocco Muna. Momin Nassimi. Tyler Nelson. Dave Patel. Alexios Perdanis. Abby Rigotti. Meredith Robbins. Billy Rice. James Schaefer. Will Vaughn. Amon Ward. And I'm familiar with bringing up the end of the alphabet here. Yuri Wu. Thank you. So one quick round of applause for everybody. And you can't go anywhere because we have one more video after this, so you can take your seats or stand up and get close enough. All right, so for those who aren't aware and for those who are, I made 2 requests for pictures. And now you're going to know why I asked for that. This will inject a little bit of fun, a little bit of professional into this here. We're able to collect a set of pictures from folks here and set it to a little bit of music here. And go ahead and hit play there, Luke.
Another turning point, a fork stuck in the road. Time grabs you by the wrist, directs you where to go. So make the best of this test and don't ask why. It's not a question but a lesson learned in time. It's something unpredictable, but in the end is right. I hope you had the time of your life. So take the photographs and still frames in your mind, hang it on a shelf in good health and good time. Tattoos and memories and dead skin on trial. For what it's worth, it was worth all the while. It's something unpredictable, but in the end is right. I hope you had the time of your life. It's something unpredictable, but in the end it's right. I hope you had the time of your life. It's something unpredictable, but in the end is right. I hope you had the time of your life.
Well, all righty. As I say, that's a wrap. Thanks for everybody coming out today. There are some new sponsors for next year who were here, who were able to observe today. I hope they like what they saw. I know I did. So congratulations to all of you. On behalf of CBA, good job, well done. Thank you.